in the Palmer House in Stonington, Connecticut.
This is part of the Stonington Historical Society's solo sailing oral history program. Today is February 21st, 2019, and we're talking with Matt Turner, who is a long resume of sailing, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Bermuda one too. But first of all, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into sailing, and especially how you might have gotten interested in solo sailing.
I am not typical of sailors in this area. I went to hear Rob Johnstone give a talk at the LaGrua Center a couple of weeks ago, and the house was packed. There was standing room only. And I was really impressed that he, in presenting his slides, it was supposed to be on the history of sailing, but it was really his life of sailing in Stonington. And he had pictures of everybody in the room when they were teenagers, when they were, in their 20s sailing in Stonington. And everybody recognized friends, and I realized I'm delighted to live where I do and sail where I do, but I'm a newcomer to this whole culture. And I grew up in Bethany, Connecticut, outside of New Haven. And when I was a kid, my best friend, when we were probably 7 years old or thereabouts, his parents had a boat, and he did not like sailing, but they dragged him out every weekend to go sailing, and it just worked better when I went along. The chemistry for the family was better if I was there, which worked just splendidly for me. So we sailed out of Milford and on a little rocket, a 23-foot plywood rocket, which I'd love to see one today. I remember it as being pretty comfortable for four people. I don't think it really was. And occasionally we'd have an opportunity to borrow a Pearson Triton, and we thought that was luxury beyond just over the top. It was 28 feet, it was fiberglass, it had space below to sit at a table, and it had a head. So we really thought that was elegant. But that was my introduction to sailing. And then years later, I had a sailfish that I picked up as a kid, but my parents weren't into sailing at all and had nothing to do with it. And really, I started sailing when I was old enough to get a driver's license, and I started using my sailfish. But it was when I got out of college and I was living in Washington, D.C., that Washington can be a pretty uncomfortable place in the summer. So my then girlfriend, now my wife, and I bought a little catamaran, an Aquacat, that we could use on the Potomac River, and it was just a nice way to enjoy Washington, and we had a lot of fun with it.
The trouble there is the summer winds die.
Yeah, they do. It's oppressively hot and dead air. We got a day sailor and went over to the Chesapeake with it. We'd trailer it around on the Chesapeake, and we sailed all over the Chesapeake Bay when we had the day sailor, because we could drive to different launching places each weekend. So we really got to see a lot of the Chesapeake. Gradually, we ended up with a 24-foot Dolphin, which was a really perfect cruising boat for two people on the Chesapeake, shallow draft, keel centerboard. And we had a lot of fun with that. And then in '79, we got a Choi Lee Offshore 31, because Pat was pregnant, and we decided we needed something bigger. And we had that for probably 10 years, and then we got the Valiant that I have still today. We bought it in '88. And for me, it's just a great boat, especially for single handling, because it's 32 feet, which for me is manageable.
So, and this was all on the Chesapeake? When did you start to move this way?
We came to Connecticut in 1982 with the Choi Lee, and we had it until '88. We bought the Valiant in the fall of '88. And Valiants are Valiants are just wonderful boats.
And what's your boat's name?
Tyche, Tyche, Tyche.
Tyche. And where's that come
It gets mispronounced by every bridge tender and person I tell it to. But they think it's Tai Chi, but it's Tyche, which is a Greek god and also a Dutch god. I was pleased when a Dutch friend said, "Oh, that's the god. That's the Dutch god of partying and good times." And I thought, "Oh, well, maybe we won't change the name then," because the name came with the boat.
Did you Google that and make sure?
She's Dutch, and no, I didn't. This was pre-Google opportunity. This was 1988, so at least pre-Google for me. But it's a real solid boat. Valiants have a pretty good reputation.
And how did you find Stonington?
When we were in Washington in 1981, we decided we had been looking and thinking we were getting itchy to move out of the inner city. We lived right in the inner city, and we'd had our first child, and I was more anxious to leave the city than my wife was, but we sailed to Maine on the Choi Lee, and on the way we stopped to visit my parents who were in the New Haven area, and we just for convenience we came into Mystic and left the boat in Mystic. And during the course of that trip I was thinking I wanted to find a place to move, and Pat knew that's what was on my mind, and she finally put her foot down and said, "No place north of Cape Cod. The water's too cold and the season's too short," which was true. And we ended up coming back into Mystic and decided this looked pretty good. So it was in the back of my mind, and in 1982, 3 years later, that's where we ended up. And it's been north. We live right in the center of the village of North Stonington, and it just worked out really well for us. We've been very happy there. So.
But you mentioned earlier that you really liked cruising.
Yeah, I do. I'm not a racer. I'm really Wednesday night races don't appeal to me at all. I've gone out with other people on their boats racing, and it's been enjoyable. It has a lot to do with who the people are. When you sail with Sandy Van Zandt in a race, he is an impressive person to sail with, and you learn a lot in the process. So I've enjoyed that, but I'm just not into racing. But offshore racing is more about it's not the fine tuning of racing so much as managing the boat. I think it has more to do with seamanship than it does with racing strategy.
So how did you make that transition to go from a cruising focus over to saying, okay, I want to try something offshore, a little bolder?
Well, Sandy Van Zandt, who I met Sandy, and I realized he's a fabulous person, and we just seemed to hit it off, and we just get along well. And I was learning a lot of sailing technique from him, and so we were just enjoying spending time together. And he said to me one day, I'm thinking of doing the Bermuda 1-2. And I knew about it. I'd known Stuart Hayward, who did, I think, 10 or 11 of the Bermuda 1-2s. And he told me about it. So I knew what the race was. And Sandy said he was thinking of entering it with his Tartan 30, 31. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure whether it's 30 or 31, but it's a Tartan 30. Mm-hmm. And a big cockpit. It's not the boat that I would pick to go offshore in. And I sort of decided, well, maybe I'll play along with this and see if I can't convince Sandy that this isn't the best idea he's ever cooked up. So I said, yeah, I'll enter too, just to have some credibility. And that didn't pan out. I ended up doing the race. And we had a lot of fun. We spent the winter in the winter of 2014. This was in preparing for the first race that we did, which was 2015. We added up all the equipment we needed to put on our boat. There's a long list of required equipment, and I said, I can't afford this. It's just going to cost a fortune. And we decided, well, we could find things on eBay or go into consignment stores. And we really had a fun winter, just going to Newport, and you'd walk into these places where you thought you were completely unknown, and suddenly someone says, Sandy Van Zandt, how are you? You know, I mean, he's well known. So it was a lot of fun. We had a good time. And we got some real deals on equipment. I ended up picking up a used monitor wind vane that has worked fabulously for me. And it was actually purchased by someone who never got it installed on their boat, and eventually they died, and the kids wanted to get rid of it. And I got a brand new monitor wind vane that was 12 years old but never used. And that's the most important piece of equipment to have on your boat, I would say.
So as you were taking the list of required, what else did you do for the boat? And you said it took you a long time to get it ready.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of work to do. My return crew, fellow Jerry Ledger, who came up to me one day at the yacht club and said, "Hey, I hear you're thinking of doing the Bermuda one too. Would you consider putting me on your list of potential crew for the return race?" And I said, "Oh, the list? Yeah, sure. I'll play along with this." But Jerry is an extremely good crew. He's a sharp sailor. He owns No Ank Electric and knows electricity inside out. I don't understand electricity at all, so he covers my weak spots, and he's just a very good crew. And how did we get to that?
We were talking about getting the boat ready.
Oh, and in prepping the boat, he had done a couple of Bermuda races, and so he had advice. The thing that I was most impressed with was he said, you want to make your floorboards fixed. You don't want floorboards that are just sitting in place. They need to be locked down. So if you do take a spill, they don't hit you in the head. That was good advice, and they stayed in place when they had to, and we put on some addition. I put on a new. I think that was the year that I put the new autopilot, which is just a Raymarine wheel pilot, 32-foot boat. I had to install the monitor wind vane, which was slow. It was you want to get it right, and some modifications to create really strong lee cloths. I had lee cloths that were just snapped on little hooks, and Jerry said, "No, you need something much more substantial," and that worked out very well too. I'm glad I took his advice on everything that he recommended. But Sandy and I spent that winter just adding all sorts of paraphernalia to our boats, and it was good. We got a lot out of it.
But when you talk to people who weren't from that harder core sailing community, friends and family, and said you were thinking about doing this, what kind of reaction did you get?
Well, people who've never done it think you're crazy. I mean, and I think once you've done it, one of the things that shocks people is they say, "Well, how did you get there without sleeping? If it took 7 days?" Well, you sleep. You spend a fair amount of time sleeping, and the reality, everybody's initial reaction is, "Oh my God, nobody's watching out." Well, I've been on boats where there have been 6 people on a watch sitting in the cockpit all night. Nobody's sitting up on the bow to see the submerged container or log or whatever. You're going to hit stuff, whether you've got 6 people in the cockpit or nobody in the cockpit, and you're just sailing under a wind vane. And it's very misleading to think that it's safer to have multiple people on a boat. I find it actually a little bit of a relief to know that I don't have people that I need to be concerned about if anything does go wrong or if things get uncomfortable, that I know how many people I need to count before jumping into the life raft, and it's just one. And it it's much safer, I think, than people who haven't done it imagine it to be. And you tend to be very conservative about wearing a harness, and although I'm probably not as conservative as I should be, but you know that no one's going to come back and get you if anything goes wrong, so you tend to be pretty cautious. It certainly worked for me.
So maybe if we could talk a little bit about just the start of the race and how many boats there were, and what that whole the excitement of actually getting off the line.
Yeah, and actually, I want to go back and touch on one thing that struck me, not being a particularly enthusiastic racer. The difference that I've seen with the Bermuda 1-2 is that when you go to their meetings in the fall or during the winter prior to the race, people, especially if you're a newbie and you've never done it before, they want to tell you all about their boat and what equipment they have and what equipment you should get for your boat. It's not like most of the Bermuda races. If you talk to people in the Newport Bermuda race, where they've got a crew and there are 200 boats that enter the race, nobody wants to share the new sail that they got or a new piece of equipment that they've put on their boat that they think is going to improve its speed. They're very tight-lipped, and it's very competitive. The 1-2 is people are anxious to share their experiences and tell you what kind of equipment you should get. So it's different. There are only 30 or so people who do the race, so it doesn't appeal to everybody, but one of the striking differences is how they really want to help you, for what it's worth. What was your question again?
But just the whole idea of when you start.
Oh, the start. And yeah, there are 6 divisions. I think that's right. Different classes of boats, and you've spent 2 or 3 nights in Newport getting ready for the race. If you're new, you have to go through a safety inspection that's a little more rigorous than boats that haven't been through it before. That have been through it before. The process just moves faster. So you have to be there for a safety inspection, and I found it helpful to get over there, I think 3 nights before the race started. I had the time, and it was a good opportunity to meet other people and get some suggestions on fine-tuning things on the boat. The day of the race, they give you a wonderful breakfast at the Newport Yacht Club, big meal, and best wishes, and you get on your boat and you go out into the main channel off Fort Adams, and bing, 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 the bells go off and the first division leaves, second division, third division. My boat is in the 4th cruising division. And I've had good starts.
So how many boats were in your division?
6, I think. I think it was 6.
And had you gotten to know any of them during this build-up?
Oh, yeah, Sandy Van Zandt was one of the boats in my division. And Peter McRae, who has done 13 Bermuda 1-2s. And he has an interesting boat. He's got a Freedom 32 and unstayed mast and a small little blade of a jib. And it's an interesting boat, but he's done quite well, and he's a very good sailor. And the rest of the fleet they're cruising boats, Islanders. I think there are 2 Islanders. There's a Tartan. So they're mid-range. The new hot boat is the Morris 36. Those have become really popular. Really, really well built, very solid, very expensive boats, but I think there are 3 of them registered for this year's race. So they're a good size, especially for the single-handed leg. 36 feet is manageable, and they seem to be a good boat for. They're well suited for the race.
So it sounds like it's a very collegial group, but still competitive.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And yeah, I'd say that's exactly what it is. They're very anxious to help you, and when you get to Bermuda, the reception is tremendous. If you need help coming into the dock, and you more med style, where you have to get your stern to the wharf, and everybody comes down to help, and it just works out well.
So let's talk about the race. You said it was 7 days.
Well, it was for me. It's not 7 days. It was 3 for the winner, but but I think they must have gone a shorter route.
and what was a day like?
One of the things I realized in doing it, you do get tired, and partly from sleep deprivation, and partly it's just physically challenging if it gets rough. And every race that I've done has had a rough period in it. You just become physically exhausted. When I got to Bermuda the second in 2017, I was covered with black and blue marks. My legs were banged up. I'd fallen on a winch on my face, so I had not a black eye, but a little bit of a puffy cheek, which didn't look good. So it can be physically challenging, and a day can. I mean, some days are just idyllic. 10 knots of wind, dolphins swimming along next to you, beautiful Gulf Stream weather. The water's warm. You're comfortable, and everything's delightful. And it can also whip up winds into the 30s or more, and all of a sudden it gets, especially if the wind and the stream are opposed, it can really get rough, and that's happened.
And I assume when it gets rough, things can break.
Yeah, I've been lucky. I haven't had too much equipment break. I haven't had much breakage. Although the last race, when I got back and I was home, I was back at my mooring, and I discovered that my jib halyard was down to a couple of fibers. It was just about to give. It was chafing at the masthead. So things can break, and be hard pressed if I lost my jib halyard. How I'd have to go up the mast, and that wouldn't happen until it calmed down. It was a rough race.
So, are you by yourself most of the time, as far as other boats?
Completely. Yeah, I don't. I have when I've done the race, until you get close to Bermuda or until you get close to Newport on the return, I haven't seen anybody.
And do you have any idea how you're doing? Do they communicate that?
Yeah, you do. People aren't. Now that's an example of where they are competitive. A lot of people turn off their AIS. AIS is one of the things that just has made it so much safer. AIS identifies boats that are near you and tells you if you're on a collision course with them. It gives you the name of the vessel. So if you see a ship, it used to be if you wanted to communicate with a ship, you just said, "I'm trying to reach a ship." On your VHF, you'd be trying to communicate with them, and they often had no idea who you were talking to. Now you can call them by name and ask them what are they receiving your signal, and are they aware of your presence? And usually that's all I want to know. It's just that they do see me.
And did you see the ships?
Yeah, you do. Especially coming in, the traffic going into New York and Boston. Mm-hmm. You'll pick up ships there, and the one time where you do see boats is when you leave Newport and you get down to the edge of the continental shelf, which is usually about 24 hours. It's 110 miles or something like that. There's there are fishing boats right on the edge of the shelf, and the advice you get from other people in the race is that you don't want to be asleep when you're sailing off the continental shelf. You want to anticipate that you're going to see boats, and you always do. I had a surprise the last race I did. My AIS, I was down below, and it was the middle of the night, and my AIS started beeping, telling me that something was out there, and it turned out there was a boat about 2 miles ahead of me, and it was the Neil Armstrong, which is a research vessel from Woods Hole. And so I kind of stuck my head up to see if I could see them, and all of a sudden, and it was a moonless night, and it must have been overcast, but it was absolutely pitch dark. I mean, you couldn't see anything. And suddenly they turned on spotlights, and it was like a lightning flash in my face. And I called them on the radio and asked them, what, do you see me? And they said, yep, we see you. We just turned on our spotlights because there's a lot of fishing gear around us, so you want to be aware of that. And I did not encounter any fishing gear, but I appreciated that they were warning me. But that's one of the things they tell you to be careful of at the edge of the continental shelf. The fishermen will leave out lines, and you don't want to get tangled on one.
Mm-hmm.
Peter McRae had an incident where he caught one on his rudder, and he was not a happy camper until he managed to get it off. But it involved going over the side and cutting things. Not something that you really.
And these are just adrift, or were they left for
They,
fishing?
they're left for fishing, yeah.
Mhm.
And typically they'll have high riders, which are floats with a pole and a radar, hopefully a radar reflector on them, so you can pick them up on radar if it's at nighttime and avoid hitting them. But once you're off the continental shelf, things quiet down in terms of traffic quite a bit.
Mhm. And that's where you can get some sleep and do with the autopilot?
Yeah, yeah.
And what sort of, would you sleep in short bursts or?
On the advice of my crew, Jerry, we fashioned lee cloths with a pocket. If you just imagine the bunk, the lee cloth is attached to the plywood underneath the cushion of the bunk, and it's about 18 inches high, maybe 12 inches high, but it's got a sleeve, and you put a tube in the sleeve that sits in two catchments on the bulkheads at the end, so that you've got a very strong support for the lee cloth. So if the boat flips way up on its side and you're basically lying on the pole, it's not going to give and let you fall. And it works. Yeah, the Gulf, figuring out where the Gulf Stream is going it's almost more important than the weather. And as Frank tries to impress on us, the Gulf Stream influences the weather. The weather actually tracks where the Gulf Stream's going, and the trick, particularly, it's not just the stream, but the eddies that are spinning off the sides of the stream. If you can catch a favorable current, whether it be the eddy or the stream itself, it just makes an enormous difference in how you're doing. I was looking at my logs last night in anticipation of talking to you guys, and the second year we gave up because we were in 18 to 20 knots of wind. We were doing 7 to 8 knots in the water, and we were doing 2 knots over the bottom.
So you were just spinning.
So we were just basically, we said, to hell with this. It's just, I mean, you reach a point where you just decide, this is crazy. We're going to be the last boat in. And it was really frustrating. Peter McRae somehow caught a fair current, and we saw him in the morning. That was an unusual, that was an exception to the rule. We did see Peter, and I called him on the radio, and he said he was fighting a current too, but sometime shortly after that, he changed course, and he got into a fair current, and he did quite well. He didn't win, but he did quite well, and got in a lot earlier than Jerry and I did. So
So the people that have done this a dozen times, there must be an advantage in just having the experience of dealing with that.
Oh, I'm sure there is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The more you do it, I think the more comfortable you become with it. And I was going to tell you, you were asking about dolphins. We on the second or the first race that I did on the return leg, where you've got a second person on the boat. Jerry Ledger was my return crew. We were and that race had some of the worst weather that we'd encountered. Most of the boats ended up going too far east, so they were over near Martha's Vineyard. Jerry, I credit him for deciding that what we really wanted to do was try to get on the rum line or a little bit to the west of the rum line, and we were the only boat that did that. And in the beginning, everybody else was getting way off ahead of us, but they were going in the wrong direction, and we caught a fair current. The winds were not quite as severe where we were, and because the wind and the waves were both going in the same direction, the seas weren't as rough for us as they were for the other boats. One boat dismasted, 2 boats lost their rudders, and several boats had damage, dodgers that got blown out and things like that. We were doing just fine, but early in the morning, just at first light, we were both below, lying in our bunks with our heads at the front of the bunks. We learned a lesson from this. We hit a whale, and the boat just stopped like you'd hit a brick wall. And there was a crash, and then there was a second thump that we both heard. And I jumped up and looked out the stern to see, open the companionway to look back and see what the hell we'd hit. I thought we'd hit a container, and all I could see was 2 or 3 troughs back. I could see a white disc, which I didn't know what it was, but I thought it didn't look like turbulence in the water. It looked like an object of some sort. And later, when we got home and I was looking on the internet, and I saw a clip of a sailboat hitting a whale, and they had footage showing this whale rolled on its side, and all you could see was this white disc. And I realized I think that is what I saw, because Jerry and I both thought it must have been a whale, because we heard the two thunks. It wasn't falling off a wave. There were big seas, and had it not been for the second thunk, I think we would have decided we just got thrown off a breaking wave and crashed. But the second thunk told us it was something that we'd hit, and it hit the skeg or something as we were leaving it.
So the tail dip.
Yeah.
So is it the fluke you saw, the white disc?
No, what I think I
belly?
saw was just the belly, and I'm not even sure. It was not good light, and it was a pretty good distance away. It was 3 troughs, 2 or 3 troughs behind us, so 100 feet or so. But it certainly made an impression on us, and we don't sleep with our heads forward anymore. We learned that lesson.
But the dolphins, was that sort of a fun thing when they show up?
Oh yeah, it always is, and they're fabulous. We've had dolphins every trip, but the last time when I was doing the single-handed leg, I had a school of 20 of them that stayed with me for several hours, and they're just great. They are curious, and they just come up alongside you and swim. You see them looking up at you, and it's delightful.
So ocean entertainment.
Yeah.
Good. So now, when you go from the single-handed piece to the 2-person, is it suddenly kind of funny to have somebody to talk to?
Yeah, I don't find it strikingly different. It's much more. I'm more comfortable or relaxed when I have Jerry on the boat. One of the things that really impresses me with Jerry Ledger is that typically I will do if something needs to be done with the jib, or someone needs to go up on the foredeck, more often than not, I'll say, I think I should go up, and you stay in the cockpit. And Jerry is perfectly willing to go up on the bow, but he's, his view is I'm the captain, and if that's what I want to do, that's what I'm going to do. But he anticipates everything that I need when I'm up there. If I'm trying to free a sheet, I don't need to look back and tell him I'm trying to free this sheet. He's focused on what I'm doing, and it's just very reassuring to know that I've got someone who's not only watching what I'm doing, but anticipating what I'm going to be doing next, and he seems to be ahead of me in that regard. So we've had a real good experience. One of the things that I get a kick out of when I do my single-handed leg, I eat a lot of oatmeal. I don't cook a great deal. It's often not feasible, but even if it is, I'm just not particularly interested in food. And if the weather gets rough, I've learned oatmeal is the best thing to eat because you're pretty comfortable with it. Jerry, when he first offered to sail with me, he said, "One thing I got to tell you, I'm a foodie. I want to have a good meal once a day, something to look forward to." And he and his wife Amy, fly to Bermuda together, run a little house or an apartment. And the day that we leave Bermuda, Jerry shows up with a cooler with a half a dozen or more frozen meals, and all we need to do is pick what we want to eat and put it in the oven for 45 minutes, and we have great food. And it's strikingly different from when I'm by myself.
So he stays on the top of the list.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't do it with anybody else. He's been great.
So let's talk a little bit about the changeover. So you finish the single hand part. You're all in there. Do you all wait for everybody to be in and then to start again? What goes on?
Of course, it depends on when you get there. But I'm really kicking myself that I didn't bring the notebook that I have with all the papers for the 1-2. We can look it up online. But the departure date from Newport and the departure date from Bermuda are established now, actually, for this coming year's race. If you get to Bermuda in 4 days, you're going to have about a week of time in Bermuda to do whatever you want to do, and hopefully not crash on a scooter. They're really getting safety focused. The biggest safety issue we have isn't people getting hurt on their boats. It's the number of people who crash scooters when we're in Bermuda. So they're saying, you can get a bus pass for very little money, and they're a lot safer. But most of them, you have 2 to 3 days at least in Bermuda to recuperate and regroup and fix things.
And do the sailors kind of get together? Is that part of the camaraderie?
We stay at the St. George's Dinghy Club, and we take it over. It becomes our base. And there's a woman who is just so good to us, and I can't think of her name, but she is the bartender and the matron of the club, and she spoils us terribly. She puts together a big meal one night for us, and she's the bartender, which is a key role, and it's just a very comfortable little club, and the fact that we take it over just makes it for a very easy, comfortable place to be. Good showers.
Are most of the sailors from around here?
No, there are a fair number from the Chesapeake. Peter McRae is from Maine. He's Thomaston, Maine. There'll be a couple of boats this year that are coming down from Maine. So they're East Coast, but pretty much Chesapeake Bay and on up. But I guess the lion's share of them are from Newport and this immediate area.
So now when you finish, you're finishing at different times. Do people wait around? Is there an event that you're all celebrating each other?
You call they have someone at the dinghy club monitoring a VHF radio, and you call them when you're approaching, and you call them when you've crossed the finish line, and they keep track of your time, and that's pretty much it. The last time I did it, when I got to Bermuda, about 10 hours out, the wind completely died, and the seas were still very rough. And the reality was, I'd been out. I was on my 6th day, so I knew I wasn't going to get any trophy for any kind of performance. And so, and the boat was just slapping. I think that's the worst thing that happens when people say, what's the most uncomfortable part of the experience that you've had? It's not when the winds are blowing like hell and the waves are huge. It's when the wind stops blowing and the waves are huge, and the boat has no wind to provide stability. That just can be maddening. And so I decided this doesn't make any sense. I started my engine and ran the engine for, I think, 8 hours to get to Bermuda. As I'm approaching Bermuda, I picked up Doug Shearer on he's got an Islander 36, I think, and he's done a number of the races. And so I knew that he knows the channel into St. George's. I was tired, and I thought, I'll just follow Doug, and I called him on my radio and told him I'm about a mile behind you and I'm going to just follow you in. And he said, yeah, that's fine. And he's pretty laid back. And so I'm following along behind him when all of a sudden I hear Bermuda Radio calling him on VHF. And Bermuda Radio said, you're headed towards a shoal and you should change your course immediately. And he called them back and said, he said, I'm up to my ears in problems. My sails are caught. He couldn't furl his jib, and his engine wouldn't start. So I called him and told him I'd stand by to offer assistance if I could. And the long and short is I ended up towing him in. And that was exciting. Trying to get a line onto a boat in 6-foot waves was quite an adventure.
Especially after 6 plus days.
Yeah, and I was pretty tired. And just to add to the fun, the people at the club who were already in picked up the conversation we were having on the VHF, and Dan Alonso, who's one of the participants, had a dinghy with a hard bottom, an inflatable, the quick little dinghy. So he jumped in his dinghy and came racing out to help Doug and jumped up on Doug's boat and is assisting Doug. None of us, I think, were thinking that the customs regulations are very strict, that no one can get on a boat that's entering Bermuda until the boat's gone through customs. They're concerned about smuggling. And I think Dan actually knew that he was breaking the law, but he explained to the customs officer when the dust settled and we were sitting in her office. She said, you have violated the law. And he said, you should understand we're single-handed sailors, and when someone calls for help, we go out and help them. We don't care what your rules are. And she wanted a full explanation of what do you mean single-handed sailors, and we explained that we raced from Newport single-handed, had a rough trip, and she didn't do anything to it. So.
Well, it's lucky you were in a friendly port.
Yeah. Oh, very. Yeah. Bermuda has been very good to us. So.
What do you think is really special about this? Is there anything
you
want
advice I'd give people who
are
thinking about doing
it, or something you think that's really worth making sure we know about?
My advice would be to attend the meetings, preliminary meetings, and they hold parties basically with a speaker. Frank Boland will be speaking at one of them to give people information about the Gulf Stream. Go to those and arrive early and stay late and talk to people and tell them what your boat is and what equipment you have and what. The biggest piece of advice that I got was to get a wind vane. Not only do they steer the boat better than an electric autopilot in rough weather, but they don't use electricity. So if you do run your batteries down, which I've done, and you can't recharge your batteries, they don't use electricity.
What level of experience should somebody have before they think about this?
Boy. Well, for me, I had done a fair amount of single-handed sailing before I got into the Bermuda one too. It's curious. There are a lot of people who Sandy Van Zandt would be a good example. He has, in fact, and he is the best sailor I've ever met, and he really knows what he's doing. But he said the reality is he's done very little single-handed sailing. He did a circumnavigation with Sydney, his wife, and credits her with doing more of the work than he did. And I think it's just for not because I'm particularly drawn to single-handed sailing, but that's what I've found myself doing. When we had a cruising boat on the Chesapeake, my wife had a job, a regular job, working as a medical technologist at Georgetown University Hospital. I was a teacher, and so I had summers off. So, hot summer days, I'd go over to the boat and go sailing. So I was doing a lot of single-handed sailing, and I enjoy it. And I think it does. It sharpens your skills because it requires that you anticipate what's coming next or what could come next, and it doesn't allow you to be sloppy. It sort of demands that you think carefully about what you're doing all the time.
So there are more races coming, is what I'm hearing. For you.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Well, I decided not to do the 1-2 this year. I'm hoping to sail to Nova Scotia this year instead. But yeah, I don't know if I'll do the 1-2 again or not. I just don't know.
Will you go
I'm not getting any younger.
Will you go to Nova Scotia by yourself or with your wife?
Well, that's not entirely clear. I've cruised to Maine. I think I've done 12 cruises to Maine now, and I've done. Although I say I'm single-handing, I have an Australian Shepherd that is my constant crew. That's what we're getting off my sweater, is more my Australian Shepherd than my hair. But my wife she likes to garden. She's very involved in a long list of community things in North Stonington. So she'll come up to Maine and join me for part of the sail. Sometimes she does the beginning, sometimes she does the end. She'll join me, but she won't do the entire trip to Nova Scotia, I don't think. She hasn't expressed an opinion one way or the other yet. The Aussie will be with me, though.
What's your favorite place to stop on the way up to Maine?
On the way up, I would say probably York, Maine, because and you guys would appreciate this. If you haven't ever been to York, Maine, they have a very active historical society, and when you go into the harbor, which is a tricky harbor, it's a strong current, very strong current. It's a river, the York River. But once you're secured on a mooring, you can go ashore in a dinghy and in a short walk be in a historical village with half a dozen buildings, a jail, a tavern, and a house and a church. And for a very reasonable fee, you can go around and visit these houses. The docents are very knowledgeable and do a great job. So York is always a good stopping spot for me. When I get to Maine, I have friends who go camping on Idaho. And Idaho is very remote. It's part of the Acadia National Park, and it has extensive trails all over the island. But because it's offshore, it doesn't get the buses of tourists that Acadia gets. So you can do some great hiking, and there's a freshwater pond to go swimming in. And I have friends who are there, so I get to watch them smoke cigars. I don't smoke cigars, but I'll drink my share of the bourbon and have a nice evening with them sitting around a campfire. So that's always a good time.
Sounds like a nice sail.
It's been great. Maine, The other thing is, I've over the years just stumbled into different events. There's a music festival, the Sweet Chariot Music Festival on Swans Island that I always try to make, and that's fabulous, and that should not be missed. That's a 3-night affair. And Windjammers from Camden or Rockport book that they want all of the people on their boat to have seats at the music festival different nights of the week. So each day, 3 different windjammers sail into the Burnt Coat Harbor, drop anchor, and it's just fabulous to be able to watch these windjammers come and go. And great music each night and different show each night. So Swans Island is good. I have a friend who's summers on Great Cranberry Island, and I catch up with her and her kids and have known her for most of my life. So we just have different islands. They're all different, but they all have their own personalities. But it makes for a great summer.
Well, thank you. This has been really fun. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I have. It's been very nice. And what a nice place to do it.
Yeah.